Witam Państwa serdecznie, Błażej Hrabkowicz, to jest EnergaCAMERIMAGE w Toruniu. And our guest is cinematographer and director Rodrigo Prieto. Hello Rodrigo, nice to see you again.
Very nice to see you.
As usual, we'll see each other at CAMERIMAGE
Right.
in November.
Yet again.
But this time we see you we meet you as not only as a cinematographer, but also a director of the feature film, Pedro Páramo. I know that you directed some short films before, but this is your first feature film. My first question to you is, at what point in your career as a cinematographer did you think that this thought occurred to you that you would actually want to direct film at some point?
Well, I think it actually happened even before film school because what I started doing when I was a child was Super 8 movies. And I must have been 10 or 11 when I started. First 8mm, then Super 8. And there wasn't a separation, you just did a movie, right?
Sure.
You came up with ideas and you set up the camera and you shot it and you lit it if you wanted, or not, if you're outside, not. But so my first movies, my personal movies, I was directing and shooting. So it was only until I became interested in the thought of, okay, I'm going to actually go to film school, which nobody in my family had done that. Then I realized, or they told me, you had to choose. And also I started learning that what exactly cinematography is. I didn't know, even though I did camera, I didn't understand that separation. So when I was in film school, the first year in Centro de Capacitación Cinematográfica in Mexico City, we all had to direct something and then and shoot also and do sound and for other students. And then the second year you had to specialize. So I picked cinematography because I felt that the teachers were very, very strict and very serious with the directors. Like, directors had to be a certain way and have a certain level of knowledge of cinema and of culture. And for me, cinema was playful, and I just liked, as a director, making my monster movies, So that's why I think I gravitated to cinematography. So I think that enough time has lapsed that I became again I started questioning, why not also direct, and kind of go back to that. So I think that's where it comes from. And I still love cinematography and it's my passion, but I've found that expanding my creative world to also be able to direct has been very enjoyable.
So I guess it's fair to say that you, in your beginnings, you were first and foremost a filmmaker.
That's right.
That you would define yourself like that.
Yes. Yes,
Right.
I read a magazine all the time that was called Super 8 Filmmaker. That's what I considered myself.
Well, now you're a filmmaker, maybe not so much Super 8
right.
part, but although you could still do it if you wanted, you wanted to. But when you directed Pedro Páramo, did you find that your experience as a cinematographer, well, you're also a co-cinematographer on this movie, of course, but did you find that your experience as a cinematographer helped you transition to directing, and that your creativity and your knowledge about framing, composing the film visually, it must have helped you?
Yes, I definitely, having been around so many different directors and collaborating in different styles and different dogmas too. Some directors have a very, very specific way that it has to be like that. And other directors, not at all. It has to be like this. So witnessing that has been really fabulous for me, and collaborating with them, and also how each director utilizes the language of the camera and also participating in that, and how they communicate with the actors and how the performances come alive through what a director says, So all these are things that I've been observing and listening and feeling. So it's definitely there. I mean, when I was directing Pedro Páramo, all that was present. probably subconsciously, but it was there.
Yeah, you mentioned performances of the actors, and this is something that when I was thinking about transition from cinematographer to director, when you're a cinematographer, of course, language of the camera, like you said, this is something you work on with the director. This is something you're really fluent in as a cinematographer. But as a cinematographer, you don't usually work with actors on their performances. So was this sort of a new territory for you?
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. In fact, as a cinematographer, I tend to try to disappear from the actor's vision. You know, I don't want them to feel that they have to hit a mark and that there's this light that you know. I try to make the set as easy for them as possible and be very respectful of their space, because I like acting. When I was in school, and there were theater classes, I always wanted to be one of the actors, and I volunteered to do it because I enjoy that. And so I'm very aware of what the actors go through and that vulnerability. So for me to direct actors, I didn't know really if I was going to be able to know when a performance is working or not. Because I see directors having to make that choice constantly and adjusting. How do you know if you need to adjust? I know perfectly when I need to adjust a light because it's bothering me. You know, if there's something that feels wrong to me, I adjust.
Or a different lens, or
yes, and then I'm obviously very familiar with that. But I was afraid that maybe I wasn't going to have that same thing with directing actors. But I found that I did. That I was able to recognize or feel if something felt authentic in a performance to me, right? It's subjective, but and I know that the director is kind of the substitution of the audience in a film set compared to theater. So in theater you have the energy of the audience. On film, it really is the director, and certainly the camera too. You know, the operator also has an energy that actors respond to. So I found that was possible, that I could do that and think about the lighting and think about the camera and all that, but at the same time be completely there with the actors and feeling what was going through their emotions. Yeah.
You didn't have a moment where you wondered, what would Martin Scorsese do?
No, but I did feel his influence. I did.
And you worked with him on a number of movies,
yes. And I also felt the influence of Alejandro Iñárritu, of Ang Lee, of Greta Gerwig, so many directors. I felt it. Scorsese, I guess more particularly because I've been working very much lately with him, and there are certain shots in the movie that those are probably a conscious homage to Scorsese, and so yes, and I showed him the edit when I was not finished yet, and also him not being Mexican, to me it was important to have another perspective, you know, and to see also if he understood the story, because it's a very complex story. Yeah. In fact, the novel itself, the author recommended reading it 3 times to understand it. So I didn't want that to have to happen with the movie. I wanted it to be understood on the first view, but hopefully it leaves you with hunger to see it again, you know. So that was important for me to see if a foreigner and a director, for that matter, the director would get it, and he did. And he had a couple of suggestions in editing, which of course I did, and so that was wonderful. The same with many other my friend directors, Alejandro, Rodrigo Garcia, Greta. I showed them the edit, and they had very good suggestions.
Diving a little bit deeper into Pedro Páramo and this complex story, as you said, because it is really complex, and for a feature film debut, even for such a experienced filmmaker as you, as yourself, it must have been quite challenging. But what I found it to be really cinematic, because cinema has this unique ability to deal with time, to mold the time, to construct it, to deconstruct it. And this is something I see also in your film, that you actually, the time frame of this film is really, really complex. So how did you go about to actually tell us this, show us this through visual language?
Yes. I think that it's interesting because the novel is written that way. The structure is broken, and it's a kind of an experimental structure, especially for 1950s when he published it. But I think maybe that there is something cinematic for sure about the way that's written, that structure. And I think that maybe that's why it's been attempted several times already. This is the fourth adaptation of it for cinema. But it's never quite worked. I'd like to believe that we finally found it, but working with a writer, Mateo Gil, we decided to not change what didn't need to be changed, you know, and the challenge was how do we make that experience that we had reading the novel, how do we translate that into cinema, you know, and also there's things about the language, not only of the dialogue, but the language of description of sound as well that Rulfo does in the novel that was really interesting for me to figure out how to visualize that. So that was pretty challenging, but I did take the novel as my inspiration, and also Juan Rulfo's photographs, because he was a photographer as well. And other Mexican photographers were influences, still photographers. But it was part of the concept also of the movie and the book as well is non-linearity of time, and this is something that goes back to before the conquest of Mexico. In Mesoamerica, before the Spaniards came, there wasn't a linear concept of time; it was circular. So that's reflected in the story, even though it happens, you know, during the time of the Mexican Revolution, around that. So I wanted to overlap the time. So it's not just go to a flashback and go back and forth, and it's not just that. I wanted to connect the different times. So there's sometimes a shot will start in, you know, in the, let's say, present in 1930s, and the same shot suddenly is 1914 or whatever it might be. Or a character that you see in a certain time, then suddenly is at this other time. Maybe it's a ghost, but maybe it's also just an echo of the past, or like a superimposition of the past that's happening simultaneously.
Yeah, this is, you mentioned Ghost, and for me it is a land of this world that you depict in Pedro Páramo. It is a land of dreams, ghosts, echoes, and really surrealist even world. Was it important to you to actually ground this through the central character, to actually have this kind of center of the story around which you could build the rest of it, so that the audience has something to follow?
Yes. It is surreal, and that's a good term because lots of people call it magic realism, but I think Pedro Páramo is a precursor of magic realism, but it's not that. It's more of a surreal story. But it's grounded in reality. I mean, the characters are real, and even though they might die and become a ghost or something, or mud, when they're interacting, it's natural, it's normal, you know? So I tried to represent that with a camera as well. I didn't want to do big camera tricks, or even when you see someone that maybe is already dead, I didn't want to do them transparent, or, you know, it's just normal, because even the ghosts don't know that they're dead, you know? They don't realize that they're... So I didn't want the audience to realize that either. And it's an experience you have as well when you're reading the novel. It's almost a naturalistic story. Costumbrista, like the customs of people, and then suddenly not, you know, suddenly it's surreal, you know. So I wanted to have that in terms of the camera, just a regular medium shot for dialogue, nothing fancy practically at all. So that was part of my approach, you know, to make it pretty normal in a very strange world.
Yeah. Thank you very much for talking to us, Rodrigo.